Libraries and archives, they've been preserving newspapers, documents, vital records, and local history on microfilm for about a century now. Your responsibilities in your library, they might include taking care of that microfilm, but there is a good chance that maybe you were involved in creating these collections because a lot of them go back quite a ways. Maintaining a microfilm collection isn't really all that complicated, and that's one of the strengths of this format, but there are some things you might want to know about your collections. So first of all, let's consider the kind of microfilm you have. What's in the box? Preservation microfilm in libraries follow standards that are set by the Research Libraries Group. RLG guidelines stipulate the use of 35mm microfilm. Government records, you'll often find those are on the narrower 16mm microfilm. And then some of you might also find microfiche in your collections. Those are film cards, and they're typically about the 4x6" range, though the formats may vary, and the number of images on those fiche can also vary quite a bit. Less commonly, you might find microfilm cartridges or aperture cards, and we're happy to answer your questions about all of these formats, but we are going to focus mostly today on the film that makes up the majority of library collections. So let's consider what's on the box. So some microfilm was produced commercially to distribute big metro newspapers like the New York Times or academic journals, things that you might now see in your digital subscriptions today. Other microfilm may contain local newspapers, archival collections, vital records from government offices, and your library might be the only one to have copies of those materials. So of course, that's very important for researchers, historians, and other patrons. But while microfilm box labels, they don't really have a lot of room on the spine label, they can help you prioritize identification, retention, evaluation, and so on. Labels can also help you connect to additional metadata that you have recorded in your catalog. So let's evaluate your collection. That allows you to make plans for preservation and access. Film created prior to the 1980s or acquired from government offices and corporate archives, that may or may not meet those RLG guidelines. So let's look at what you might find in your microfilm collection. All photographic film consists primarily of a plastic base layer and then an image emulsion layer. Now, if you want more of a full breakdown, that includes additional protective and adhesive layers, but these two, they're the most important layers to assessing your film. Microfilm with a polyester base and a silver halide photographic emulsion is the standard for preservation purposes. So how is microfilm different from other film that you might find? Silver halide is the classic emulsion for any black and white photography. In microfilm, there are smaller silver particles and they produce fine-grained images that are capable of replicating really small text. The film emulsion is usually engineered for high contrast images, which again is useful for text, but the edges are not punched like the standard mass market camera film or motion picture film. So there's quite a difference in the look in that way. The gelatin structure of film emulsions, that's been found to last for ages, so long as humidity and temperature are kept in check. So the silver halide is the classic reaction for creating black and white images. If it's processed and stored correctly, it's stable and permanent. And the number that we've heard is about 500 years that can be stored in your collection. Diazo and vesicular films, they were created as inexpensive ways to duplicate service copies from a microfilm master, but they use ultraviolet light to expose image on a film, and then diazo and vesicular duplicates, they could be made without a darkroom, which is kind of an advantage. Diazo film was developed using an ammonia-based process, and vesicular film was developed using heat, but there is a trade-off for that convenience, and that is that either of those processes were designed to really last beyond a few decades. So if you have some of that film in your collection now, you might be finding that it's breaking down or just not quite as good as what it used to be. Color film processes have been through many iterations, and there was some color microfilm that's been attempted, but the longevity never really panned out for reliable archiving. The oldest flexible films were created on cellulose nitrate base. That was used in the first half of the 20th century. If it's not frozen though, it suffers chemical breakdown within a few years. And if it's sparked by warm temperatures, it can just spontaneously catch fire. In Hollywood, 70% of the movies from the 1920s, they were lost to history due to the instability of that nitrate film. It was used for early microfilm. Your library probably doesn't have any. Let's say that hopefully your library doesn't have any because it's just not really stable, not a really stable medium. Recognizing both the immediate and archival dangers of using cellulose nitrate, the film industry shifted to cellulose triacetate by the mid-century. And because acetate film is not prone to burning, it was marked as safety film. Acetate film is used in some applications, but it wasn't really ideal for long-term archival storage. As it ages, it gives off an acidic acid vapor, really smells like vinegar whenever you are smelling that. And that's kind of a telltale odor that you're going to find. It starts at the edges and the film will kind of start to warp and curl. And this is a good example of that. As the vinegar syndrome progresses, the plastic starts to harden. It holds that rolled shape, and it becomes a lot more difficult to lay flat. And that can cause the photographic emulsion layer to separate from the film base. It also makes it really fragile. So there you go. Within time, the base layer becomes more and more brittle. It can break really easily. And so it's important to start duplicating that acetate film before it reaches this point. We can do quite a bit with duplication if it is starting to get some vinegar syndrome, but if it gets to something like this right here, that's really, really difficult to get any kind of a duplication off of. But we will talk more about duplication in a moment. So polyester, known as PET, it's the family of plastics that are used to make single-use bottles for water and for sodas. Disposable plastics take forever to break down in a landfill or in the ocean. That is indeed a problem, but plastic film that lasts for centuries, that's exactly what the preservation community needed, and it became the norm for preservation starting in about the 1970s. By 1980, new 35 millimeter microfilm was almost always produced on a polyester base. If you want to know whether your microfilm is polyester or acetate, the easiest test is to hold a reel up to a light source of some kind, and you'll find that polyester film is translucent while acetate remains more opaque. So as you're evaluating your microfilm collections, what are those warning signs and when do you need to take action? In the same way that a silver coin can tarnish, the tiny silver particles in film can oxidize and form reddish spots. This red oxidation isn't really common, but if you run across it, you really need to evaluate your options right away because redox can't be reversed, but duplicating the film will preserve the content against future spotting. Redox can be prevented by treating new reels also with a polysulfide solution. When it comes to acetate film, that can be monitored visually for vinegar syndrome, and it can be checked manually to make sure that the condition isn't deteriorating. The Image Permanence Institute, they make acid detection strips that can flag acetic acid in microfilm enclosures before you even start smelling that smelly smell of vinegar. And then you can duplicate that content onto new polyester stock, and that eliminates that risk of vinegar syndrome. So what are some potential next steps for managing your microfilm collections? So let's talk about duplication. Duplicating older microfilm reels onto new polyester film, that can resolve those issues of vinegar syndrome and redox. You're going to have those film, treat it right, you're going to have it for hundreds of years. Creating a new fresh copy of everything, though, it's not always in the budget. And so probably the best thing to do is identify local and unique microfilm reels, and that can kind of help you to set your priorities and figure out what is most important to get duplicated first. Next, you want to consider your storage conditions. Microfilm should be stored in a cool, dry space, free of environmental pollutants. RLG guidelines call for steady temperatures at about 60 degrees Fahrenheit or colder and relative humidity below 60%. Reels of film can be stored together in boxes or in cabinets, but each of those reels should have its own individual acid-free box. The air in your storage space, it should be free of environmental pollutants as much as it's practical. So think about things like fresh paint, carpet, vinyl, all of those things can off-gas chemicals for a few months. You're going to smell something like a new carpet smell for a long time, and that's an environmental pollutant. Car exhaust and industrial pollution put oxidizing compounds into the air as well. and high summer air temperatures can increase local concentrations of ozone, another oxidizing molecule. Air filtering equipment does help, and it does, as does isolation from outside doors and windows. So if you can put it into a room without those things, that's even better. While maintaining the physical stability of your film collections is obviously important, maintaining access to the content that's captured on the film is the reason why these collections even exist. So like any library resource, discovery of microfilm collections relies on searchable metadata in your ILS. If your box labels and catalog records are short on information about the reel's contents, the microfilm itself should have some metadata built right into it. During filming, there are pages called targets, and those provide technical details. They'll indicate content, verify completeness, mark transitions, and whatnot. Targets are designed to be readable without intense magnification, so collecting this data is faster than scrolling through the entire reel page by page, and those are called eye-legible targets. You can usually spot those pretty easily as you're looking at the film. Now, if creating online access to your library's unique resources is your goal, scanning microfilm is an easy way to populate your digital archive. Microfilm scanners are usually designed to capture the entire reel of images in a single operation, so it's pretty easy. When you start with high quality preservation microfilm, the collection has already been organized, materials have already been collated, items have been hand placed for the camera, and the pages have already been turned. So you don't need to worry about any of that. And a lot of the work usually involved in digitization, it's already complete. We have been creating high quality preservation microfilm for the library and archives community since 1986. So we've been around a minute. We still operate a full camera studio, darkroom processing, duplication, quality control, and cold storage right here on site. But what is happening with film? You might be hearing about Fujifilm and some changes with the microfilm industry. Kodak stopped producing microfilm in 2013, and we stocked up, we tested alternatives, and we started adapting our process to get the same consistent results from Fujifilm stock. So Fuji recently announced plans to wind down its microfilm production. I believe they're talking by the end of the year. Is that right, Joe? Yeah, about the end of 2025. So we're still going to be operating a Fujifilm studio for as long as we can access the film. We've been stocking up here, and we're reaching out, and we're getting as much as we can. But we are looking ahead, and we're consulting with other operators who can serve the preservation market. So rest assured, Backstage is still going to be here to support your microfilm needs for the long run. I want to thank you so much for your time in attending today's presentation, and we do have some time if you'd like to ask some questions.
From Angela, does Backstage offer bulk digitization of microfilm?
Oh, we do. Basically, you can just reach out to us. We'll be asking questions about what kind of microfilm you have, what kind of condition it's in, and then we can get you a custom quote from there. We do have something called the Reel Deal, and that's probably the easiest way to digitize microfilm. It's created for polyester reels or very sturdy, excellent condition acetate reels. If you do have some that are curling or splitting or doing anything like that, we'd have to get it duplicated first onto polyester reels, but we can absolutely do that. We have a couple of people right now that have like hundreds of reels in their collection, and they've been kind of testing the waters to see what the process looks like. So we can absolutely help with that.
Thanks. Jennifer asks, I was under the impression that the only source of film was Fuji. Are there others?
So I was surprised by this as well when Joe told us that Fuji was going to cease operations. I think you could have picked my job off the floor. I'm gonna actually, you know more about the other company that's been working on that. As I understand it, they were kind of holding back because they didn't want to be in competition with Fuji, but now they are ramping up their operations. Can you talk more to that, Joe?
Sure. There is a organization in England, and they have been producing microfiche in England, and they have been producing camera film in England, and they didn't want to really step on Fuji's toes. But they have been a source of microfilm for our overseas neighbors. And when Fuji announced on February 13th that they were going to wind down their operations, they said, okay, we're going to start ramping up our microfilming sort of creation for camera film, for duplicating film, both negative and positive, not only internationally, but also in the United States. So what their plan is by the time Fuji winds down, that they'll have a full complement of the same type of film, the same way when Kodak ended film and we started testing the Fuji film, we see the same transition going from this film from the Fuji film. They have been working with the German National Archives for the past year or so, testing out the film and making sure that it's comparable to the Fuji film. And so far, all the results have been very positive.
So it's good news that we still have a source. Absolutely.
Thank you. Let's see. Stephen asks, we only need to be concerned about acetate. Polyester-based film does not degrade.
It really doesn't, as long as it's treated properly. Now, that said, I probably should know the answer to this question, but what happens with the film if it's not, with polyester, if it's not stored properly?
Basically, what you're looking at is polyester's longevity is much clearer than acetate film. If you keep the polyester film at 6 degrees, about 40% humidity, you should have really no problem with polyester film. However, acetate film, that's where the longevity, you start getting into vinegar syndrome and you start degrading that. With polyester film, that longevity is 500 years. Obviously, we're not going to be around 500 years to prove that number.
Right.
But that is what it has been tested for. And polyester film is much more stable. Much more stable than acetate film.
Yeah, you definitely won't find something like the redox or the vinegar syndrome with polyester reels. I'm not really aware of any other degradation that you might find, other than if it was kept in something like a humid environment or something like that. That's where it might not last 500 years, but I don't think that you're still going to see like the splitting, curling, and what you would for acetate. Does that answer your question? I guess is also my question to you. I hope it does.
Let's see, next, Varenthorn asks, if the microfilm roll tears, how do you recommend reattaching the pieces?
So we actually have here in our studio, we have something called, well, we have a couple of different ways to splice them back together. We actually have something called a butterfly splice, which sometimes we'll use that, and it's clear and it's preservation. For all intents and purposes, it is a tape, but it's not something like a Scotch tape. We also have the
ultrasonic.
Yeah, the ultrasonic. Yeah, where it basically like welds it together. If they're in a library and they don't have something like that, do you have a recommendation for what they might use?
The butterfly splicing, works out. Sometimes the tears are not straight, type of tears.
Sure.
It creates maybe some splicing of the film, cutting of the film, and then splicing it together. Butterfly splicing is probably the best way to go if you don't have a heat welded splicer.
Do you have a recommendation on what kind of tape to use, or do you recommend just actually like ordering something like some of the Okay, yeah. So the recommendation, that I don't know if you quite caught that, is to order something that would be like a preservation tape for it.
Okay, Katrina asks, do all microfilm readers have the digitization option, or is it only specific readers?
I think that would be specific readers.
The new readers that are coming out now too, they're produced by ST Imaging, where the microfilm will obviously, you load up the microfilm and you can view it on a viewer, but also you can print out PDFs. We don't have any here. I've seen some in some libraries, and they're pretty cool, and they're being made to this date. So microfilm is not going away because this equipment is being produced by, and the one that I know of is ST Imaging.
So that's a device that you would have in a library for a patron to use, right?
Correct. Yeah, I've seen them in several libraries.
And then in our studio, we have scanners that are dedicated for, moving through mass digitization, roll after roll. Okay.
Yeah.
Leanne asks, are title frames always at the beginning of a film so easy to easily find it if it exists?
So it should be, but it really depends upon who it was who created it. Sometimes you'll find that there are title pages both at the front and the end. So that way, like if it wasn't properly rewound, that you still like know what it is there. But do you know of any standards where it wouldn't be?
I've never seen standards that say that you should have any sort of the title targets or real contents targets at the end of the reel. They all should be at the start of the reel, but I have seen film that contains the real contents target or guide the contents target at the end of the reel, but that's not really standard.
Sure.
RLG guidelines, ANSI standards, or Library of Congress guidelines.
Yeah, I know that over the years working in microfilm, we would sometimes be working with older reels that were filmed elsewhere, and we've definitely seen some very interesting things on the microfilm for sure.
Nicholas asks, is color microfilming a possibility nowadays?
It's not really, no. That was experimented with at some point, but the longevity of the film doesn't really, it never really worked. I don't think that we ever did color here, did we? Oh, we did?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and exactly what you're saying about it's very expensive. You need much more sophisticated processing equipment. We couldn't duplicate in color. So if someone wanted a 3 generations archival print master service copy, you had to film the material 3 times.
Oh,
in order
interesting.
To get the 3 copies.
Okay.
Yes. I believe it still may be something in overseas in Germany or England. And it's Ilford color film that we used, but we probably stopped that probably at the turn of the century.
Okay. That was before my time here, so I had to ask that one.
Nate asks, can you store microfilm in a climate-controlled environment?
We actually have something called our printmaster storage area, and that is actually monitored every week. We go in and we make sure that the temperature is still the same. We have a little gauge,
Hydrothermograph.
Yeah, and it graphs
like
what
the
temperature is and whatnot.
I think we had a picture of that in the slides.
Okay, yeah.
2 slides back on storage, some of our shelving and HVAC
Right.
and that little gauge.
Let me see if I can find that one. Oh, there we go. Yep. So it looks like that right there.
It is climate controlled 24/7, 365 days a year. That graph in there is changed once a week. So anytime, any historical, we can go back 2 or 3, 5 years to show on a specific date what the temperature and humidity was.
Let's see. Tara asks, are there tips for identifying if film is silver halide or diazo?
Diazo is usually more of a blue, isn't it?
Diazo can be black ink or blue ink. If it's blue, definitely comes to diazo. As far as trying to, if it's black diazo or polyester diazo, that's a lot tougher to try to identify. If you have obviously acetate, that's probably the easiest to identify because there's probably about 3 easily identifiable characteristics of acetate.
So to answer your question, it can be depending upon how much film it's on, or it could be a little bit harder. I wish I had a better answer for you on that one. But definitely if there's if it's blue, that's probably a pretty good indication.
Caitlin asks, what is the fee structure for duplicating vinegar syndrome film? Does it depend on how far gone the film is?
So there is that. There's usually a base pricing, and then we could add on depending upon what kind of handling fees are needed. Depending upon the severity of the vinegar syndrome, sometimes acetate reels are really easy to duplicate because they aren't really that far gone. But sometimes if it is a matter of like more curling, it can take it can be a lot slower as far as that process.
X-Tech used to make a duplicator. It's an X-Tech 3441 that was designed for brittle film, older film, and acetate film. So any sort of acetate film, because it is there is more of a chance of brittleness, with that type of film. All acetate film is duplicated on that processor, which is a slower and manual process than polyester film, which is done in the high-speed duplicator designed for polyester microfilm.
Let's see, Emily asks, do you know if you can easily recycle acetate film?
Oh, that's a really good question. I have no idea. I'm looking to Joe on this one.
I think I can jump in on this one.
Okay.
When you're recycling film, typically the folks who do that recycling are interested in the silver content more than in the plastic content. I don't believe old acetate film, like the plastic part, is recyclable through standard plastic recyclers. But there are folks, usually they work mostly in X-ray film because there's higher volume and less shelf life. People aren't hanging on to X-rays forever like they are microfilm. So if you look for X-ray recycling, there you can find companies probably in every state that do that to reclaim the silver, and then they can properly dispose of the plastic part of the film. And that really goes for polyester film as well. If you're deaccessioning polyester film, those recyclers will take the silver content and then responsibly dispose of the film that's left over.
I know that we have somebody come by and check on our silver collection. We do have we need to make sure that the silver is being collected and it's properly being taken out of here rather than getting into the water supply. Whenever we have our silver people come by, they will oftentimes take any unused film that like if there's like any waste film that hasn't been processed, they'll oftentimes take that with them to recycle. I know that they get very, very little silver out of it, but I suppose they probably collect enough, and then it's get a little bit out of it.
Yeah, it's pretty thin layer there.
Yeah.
Let's see, we had Leanne says, did you go over the idea of scanning our old serials when the company is still publishing so we can index OCR the microfilm, index that content so articles are findable?
So whenever we do any kind of scanning, especially like with our real deal scanning, which is that's usually the most popular way to scan the microfilm, that does come with uncorrected OCR, and that even if somebody is still publishing, if I'm being frank, and I don't want it to come across the wrong way, like we don't worry about the copyright so much. We kind of leave that on the clients. I don't know really what the legality is of that. That's not that we don't care. That we just simply we kind of leave that up to you as far as what the copyright is.
And as I understand, if you're talking to your digital asset management vendor, they usually have settings so that certain things can be accessed only from a library computer or only within the library's Wi-Fi network, or can be set to access from anywhere in the world. And so you can change those settings depending on what permissions.
Yeah, and that would make a lot of sense to do that.
Kind of access. Kat asks, considering how easy it is for content to be corrupted, hacked, or otherwise rendered inaccessible online, do you recommend going all digital or keeping a physical backup?
In a perfect world scenario, it would be great to have both. We look at microfilm and digital as kind of going hand in hand. The microfilm is that preservation aspect, and then the digital is the access to it, especially with everything being so digital these days. I know that a lot of people talk about microfilm as being like a dead medium, but it really isn't, because it gives that preservation. And that's a really good point, is that things change, digital files can get corrupted. This way you have both. I know that's not necessarily the best answer to give you, because a lot of times libraries don't have that perfect world scenario and a budget to do whatever they want. But if it's possible, we do recommend both.
Verinthorn asks, is microfiche made from the same material as microfilm? Is there anything we should do if the fiche is starting to brown a little?
Do they make acetate microfiche? I know that I've seen fiche, but I believe that those that I dealt with personally. That's why I'm looking to Joe, because he's been in this industry for over 30 years.
We've talked about microfilm 16 and 35, definitely acetate. I would assume, not being a big component of microfiche 105, that it is made, polyester microfiche is made from the same mold as polyester 35 and 16.
Gotcha.
So I would assume microfiche 105 millimeter back in the 60s and 70s was under the same umbrella.
Okay.
So yes.
And that would make sense. As far, I'm sorry.
And solving that, either duplication or microfiche or something like that would probably fall in the same umbrella as 35 millimeter or 16 millimeter.
Sure. The problem we've run into is that we don't actually have any access to microfiche film any longer, unless the new place offers it.
Once again, we stocked up on Fuji.
Yeah, as much as we could, but at this point we're unable, unfortunately, because we don't get a lot of requests for it, but every once in a while people are asking about fiche, and it was just something that was kind of out of our hands, that decision was made for us that we couldn't do that anymore.
And if we were looking at a specific sample, we could help to analyze whether that is acetate or polyester base. Sure. Also, it seems like I've seen fiche in bluish and purplish tints that would indicate diazo or vesicular copies, because a lot of those are manuals and things that weren't designed to last for hundreds of years, that just needed to be good for the next 5 years until the next update came out.
Right.
Stephen asks, do you know what era most acetate film was used for microfilm?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, acetate film was probably being used sometime in the 1960s up through the 1980s. Somewhere around the 1980s, 85, 86, 87 is where polyester started getting integrated with the acetate, and there was probably a full turnover by 1990, 1991. So definitely in the late 60s, 70s, and 80s. And sometime in the mid to late 80s was when polyester started being introduced. If you had a vendor that stocked up on acetate film, you could see acetate going into the early 1990s. But again, you're talking with expiration dates with film. So I would say somewhere in the late 80s is where you would see the majority of your polyester starting to take place. So if you have film from mid 1990s to the present time, you're pretty confident it's polyester film.
All right. Dean asks, what resolution do you scan or digitize microfilm at? What file sizes result from that?
That really depends upon the size. When it comes to microfilm, it really depends upon the size of the materials themselves. We go anywhere from 12 up to like 35, 36, depending upon the size. With digital, it isn't necessarily like a specific resolution necessarily, but I feel like I'm going to give you a really bad answer on the digital question. I guess I've never discussed resolution with that.
I think, Beth, those next scanners that we use, we're at 3,000 or 4,000 pixels per inch because you're trying to get this tiny image, but that translates up to 300 or 400 pixels per inch if you're blowing it up to the paper size that those originals would have been.
Gotcha.
And I don't know much about the file sizes that come out of those, but we could certainly answer those questions if you wanted to contact us offline.
Absolutely.
Get our digital people in here to give their expertise. Catherine says, we think we have at least one journal on microfilm where these old issues are not available online. What if we want to have it digitized and discover that you have already digitized it for another client? Would you have to do the manual work all over again with our copies of the microfilm? Or is there a way to purchase what you have already digitized for someone else?
So that's a good question. We actually, I can use an example of some microfilm that we do, which I understand you're asking about digital. But we have a client in Tennessee, and there is a local library as well as a university, and they both were microfilming the same content, the exact same newspaper. We actually did have to redo like for each client. So whatever we got for this client, we couldn't use for this client. We don't own any of the scans that we do for digital or any of the microfilm that we create. That's all owned by each individual client. So we wouldn't be able to like offer it up for sale or not. If you know that client has those images, like we couldn't tell you if the client has the images, but if you know that they have it, there are agreements that are sometimes in place where somebody's like, sure, like, you can scan this. An example of that is a public library. I'm sorry, no, it's not a public library. It's one of the universities down in North Carolina, and they have a number of different titles that they microfilm, and they have a local library who wants this one title. And so we're actually doing that right now, where we have a project where we're working on those, and once we're completed, they've given permission for this library to purchase a copy of that. So we wouldn't be able to sell it to you necessarily, but if you know that somebody has those scans, we can certainly provide what we can through them. We also don't save the images. So once we digitize something for a client, there's usually a 60 to 90 day period before they're purged from our system.
Thanks, Beth. Lauren asks, what online sites or platforms do you recommend for hosting digitized microfilm collections for repositories? I know we have some promotional pricing that we can help connect people with Preservica, but I'm not sure.
We have partnered with Preservica. That is one that if you want to write in and ask that question again, I know that our digital department does have, I believe they have a list of different online places. I'm sure, I know that I can provide that. I don't have that off the top of my head, and I apologize. But I know that Preservica is a big one that we've partnered with.
Jessica asks, do you monitor the film that you store for vinegar syndrome or other degradation?
We do not. That said, if we were to walk in and we smelled something, we would definitely, contact the client and be like, hey, what's the deal here? But
the film that we store here is polyester.
True.
Polyester film. So if a client would have us store acetate film, we would highly recommend that they duplicate the film first. We would recycle the acetate film and then store the polyester for them.
Aaron asks, do you all do brown toning?
We do not.
That's polysulfide.
Oh, polysulfide. Yeah, we do that. I didn't even think that when sorry to be like so quick to say no.
What we do with the reels that we microfilm ourselves, the reels that we produce from material that is sent in for us, because we have a complete camera studio, we will offer the polysulfiding solution to those reels. We hesitate for clients to send their reels that they have that are already complete for polysulfiding, just for the sake of, if that is the only copy of the film and something would happen during the polysulfide process, not that it does, but if it does, they would lose their only copy of the film. Meanwhile, if we're polysulfiding any reels that we are producing here, we already have the material. So if something does happen, emergency, that we can always reproduce that film from the hard copy.
Leanne asks, in your opinion, is it worth rescanning or digitizing existing microfilm?
I think it is if you want to have that online access. I think so.
Matt asks, can you speak about copyright or typical license agreements as related to commercial film, say long backruns of archival newspapers? Many libraries collect archival newspaper collections that are not readily searchable. If they were digitized in OCR, it would be great for access, but what about copyright and or license agreements?
I don't really have a good answer to that, just because we don't really deal with copyright. And it's not that we don't care about copyright, but we're assuming that our clients who are sending us materials are aware of what those laws are. So again, I'm not trying to just be like give you a vague answer or not, or give you a non-answer, but I don't know enough about it to give you a good answer.
Lauren asks, how do you tell a master copy from a service copy?
Usually a service copy is going to be a positive copy. That's the one that the patron's actually looking at whenever they're in the library, whereas the master reel is going to be a negative one. In terms of, we generally deal with like three different generations. We'll have an archival master, which is the one that was actually on camera, and then a print master, which in an ideal world is the one that you copy from. If you have all three generations, you can take that camera master, you can put it away. Hopefully it's never touched again, unless something happens to the print master. The print master is kind of a little bit of a safety. And then from there, that's when the service copy is created. Now, it's not that you can't have a negative service copy, but usually the service copy is going to be positive. Now, between a print master and an archival master, those can be a little bit tougher to identify.
If you have a second generation negative, the D-min on duplicating film is usually higher.
Oh, that's true.
That's the clear part of the film. On camera master film, it's usually around a 0.04 or 0.05 reading on the densitometer, if the library does have densitometers. But the D-min is always clearer on camera film than it is on second generation negative film.
And if we're looking at a negative image, that's black text, or excuse me, a black page with white text, whereas a positive is like going to be just black text on a white page. Okay. What is the name of that preservation tape?
It's called, it's like they're butterfly splices. Do you know if there's a brand?
Now, when you're using it to mend material, it's called thermoplast, but that's not what we would. Butterfly splicing, I use butterfly splicing for my 16 millimeter, 8 millimeter home videos. It's basically butterfly splicing. Kodak used to make it. You can probably find butterfly splices on any commercial camera store,
Okay.
or even Amazon probably.
Okay.
Kate asks, what if your polyester film is stored in a room where people work, meaning it needs to be warmer than 60 degrees? Trying to build a case for shifting our microfilm collection of local historical newspapers.
Sure. It's not really going to do anything as far as like damage right now. It's still likely to last a very, very, very long time. But I don't know what kind of degradation you would actually see on that if it's just like a commercial space. I don't know. I've never seen any degradation on the polyester reels, but maybe it's just because it hasn't been around long enough for us to see it. But
you don't want to have high humidity, because the emulsion will start sticking together.
The high humidity, that's much worse than the.
And that's anything above 45, 50. I know the slide said below 60. The temperature should be around 60, give or take 5 degrees. Humidity should be a little bit lower. Below 60 is definitely 40 to 45 is below 60. But you don't want to have humidity or any sort of wetness start touching the film, because what's going to happen is your emulsion will start sticking to the film. You start trying to peel that off, and you start losing the text.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay.
Robert asks, on acetate film, what are the silver streaks and smudges that occur? I'm guessing this is maybe scratches in your service copy and why you have an archival copy?
It could be scratches, could be water streaks from the processing. Number of different things. You would need to probably have someone to evaluate the film to try to determine exactly what, it could be a number of different things.
Okay.
Jennifer asks, what do you see as the future of preservation microfilming?
We want to keep doing it for as long as we can. I know that there are fewer places that are providing microfilm services, and part of that isn't just because it's more difficult to find the film, but just because having something like a full dark room, it's not really convenient for most places. And then there's also the what goes along with the regulations that go with a dark room. I think that I foresee with Backstage that we're going to continue with microfilming services indefinitely as long as we can get film.
According to our friends overseas, on their website, right, which is microfilm.com, I think they purchased that website. It basically says on there is, please tell your clients, do not panic, do not fret over anything that they're hearing about Fuji. They are committed to the long run for preservation microfilm. Again, you're talking about the longevity of microfilm. You're talking about you cannot change the images, whereas with digital images, easily
you can manipulate them,
manipulate the images. Yeah. And again, as a film guy, what I try to tell some of our clients when we have this conversation is, if you microfilm according to the standards, the RLG guidelines, the Library of Congress guidelines, and you preserve the newspapers on film, you could digitize next week, next month, next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. That's a stable medium. It's going to be around. There are, the company in Fuji is dedicated, and when Fuji gets out, the company in England has given everybody all the insurances that they're going to be around for not years but decades to come for preservation microfilm, that it's going to be around. And again, it's a stable medium.
Let's see, Patrice asks, hello, I deal a lot with microfiche, and I noticed that a lot of our fiche film is acetate film and sits side by side together. Does that increase the deterioration of the film? Should each one be separated with proper fiche envelopes for longevity of the film?
That's a good question.
It should not. It all depends on the condition. Acetate film will not, what's the word I'm looking for? Will not
prevent?
Vent over to polyester.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Polyester film.
Okay.
But acetate film can keep on degrading if not stored, properly.
Gotcha.
So it's more about the storage
would you recommend that they
than...
have them in? I'm sorry, hold on. Would you recommend that they have them in like individual sleeves, or?
Yes, individual sleeves.
Okay, so he is recommending that. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off, Richard.
No, that's great. Thank you for clarifying there. Verinthorn asks, what is the best way to clean dirty fiche? Is there a spray we can use? Is wiping with a microfiber cloth okay?
A film cleaner. And I would say definitely a microfiber cloth.
Okay. One more fiche question. Rebecca says, we have a lot of fiche in our collection. Can you talk more about the preservation? What are we looking for when it comes to breaking down?
I think that you're looking for the same thing, as Joe was saying, because I've honestly, until today, weirdly, I've never really thought about acetate fiche, which it makes sense that it would have been made. I would say to look for the same things. Look, the big thing is that vinegar smell. That's the first step. You can have acetate film that has the vinegar smell and it's still in excellent condition. But definitely, if it's starting to peel at all, if it's starting to curl at all on the ends, that's a big one whenever it starts curling, because then it's going to start getting harder. A lot of times with acetate film, as it gets more brittle, it can split a lot easier. So you'll kind of want to watch for that. But the biggest thing is initially that vinegar smell is the first thing, that's kind of the first step as it's starting to degrade.
Daniel asks, is there a shelf life to unexposed film, especially if not kept in a climate controlled environment?
There is, but I don't know what that is.
On unexposed film, there's an expiration date. Usually we see 2 years on unexposed film, not used film. If kept in a cold, an expiration, it's basically the same way as I look at your medications at home. There is an expiration date, but if you take it the day after the expiration date, you're going to be fine. I think if kept in a cold storage, that date can usually extend by, if not years, 18 months or so. So we never get to a point where we're 2 years down the road on expiration dates. But from what I've heard from other, from our Fuji representative, you could probably extend that if kept in cold storage for another 18 months or so.
Okay.
Caitlin asks, do you notice a difference between duplicates made from archive masters versus print masters versus service copies? And how vulnerable is the master film when undergoing duplication? Can it get scratched, for example?
So generally speaking, whenever we're doing duplication, we don't really find much in the way of scratching the film. When it comes to masters, we just kind of observe a little bit of caution, and maybe like an overabundance of caution, just because we don't want to possibly damage that master. I don't really notice that there's like a difference between them as far as the quality. But that said, I mean, like if you were to have take a master and then make a print master from that, and then make a copy from that, and then if you were to make a copy of the copy, like eventually it's going to kind of break down a little bit. But
resolution of microfilm is based on line pairs, and you have a resolution chart. Every real film should have a resolution chart. So you can basically measure up to 160 line pairs per pattern. That's what our cameras get. And usually going from one generation to the next, you're losing one line pair. Again, for those of you who are back in the 80s, who used to make cassette tapes, if you kept on making cassette tapes, you would start hearing a hiss by the third or fourth cassette tape if you're making a cassette tape off the second generation that you made the third generation. Well, the same thing with microfilm is you should be, when you're creating the second generation, you're creating it off the first generation. When you're making the third generation, you're making it off the second generation. So basically, you're losing a line pair, which is resolution pattern. Not a big deal until you get to the 8th or 9th generation, which is not recommended at all whatsoever. So that's basically the only loss, very minimal, going from one generation to another.
All right, and we are almost out of time, but I think we've got time for one more question. Kat says, we're struggling to source equipment to use to service our older readers. Do you have a source of parts for older readers?
That's a good question. Do you have a source?
We have a source that we go to that sells microfilm parts. They're called it's PMA. If someone wants to contact us offline, I can definitely give you some contact information. We stock parts here, and then when we run out or we need to re-inventory, there are vendors that we reach out to.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you for those answers. Thank you all for your questions. And if you have further questions, please contact us.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming today. We really appreciate it.